You own more cameras than anybody else I know.
Do you think the Sony Burano is worth it for $25,000?
They see this camera and they're both expensive cameras.
I think the camera right now has a lot of shortcomings that just Sony's engineers just maybe didn't pay as much attention to as they probably should have. And
you pay a lot of money to solve one or two very small problems. How do you justify owning all these cameras? What's good, creative fam? Brandon Washington here, and welcome back to another episode of Uncensored. Today we have an amazing guest who's going to be joining us to be talking about a camera that, honestly, when it first came out, I got really excited really fast, and then quickly got less excited as I did a little bit more research. But our guest today has done all of the research for me, and he packaged that into an amazing video that after I watched, I was like, okay, I absolutely have to get him on the show today because we got to talk about this. And this is the new Sony Burano. Now, for those of you guys who don't know anything about this camera, this is Sony's new cinema camera, but it's more in line with the Venice system than it is in line with like the FX3, 6, and 9. So it sits kind of above the FX9, but sits below the Venice 2, and so it's kind of in this new weird place. But the thing that makes it really interesting to me is its price. It starts at $25,000, which is like, Sony didn't have anything at that price point. But we know one of my favorite brands, Red, has the Raptor that sits right there at that exact same price point.
Maybe direct competition.
Maybe they stepped in the ring. But these are two totally different cameras. And so I decided I want to bring somebody on the show. As you guys know, I don't like to talk about things that I don't know. So I would rather bring somebody on who knows what they're talking about. So I brought on my good friend, Rob Machado. But before we bring him up, I do want to mention a couple things about him. When he comes up on the show, if you have questions about buying gear, this is the guy to ask those questions to, because he is probably the only person I have ever run into who has bought more cameras than I have bought. And the crazy part is that he doesn't just like buy a camera and then like another camera, sell that camera and then go buy a different one. He just keeps buying more and more cameras, which is absolutely insane. And so I'm really excited to talk to him because not only does he have more gear acquisition syndrome than I do, but he's also just like one of those creators that if you've never watched his content, you're going to go down a rabbit hole really quickly, because when it comes to his skill set as a working DP, I don't think there's anyone on YouTube who does it better. Like, I'm being very honest when I say that, and I didn't tell him I was going to say this, but I really do think when it comes to working DPs on YouTube right now, who's doing big high dollar productions for Netflix and for OnlyFans, but not like what you think. We'll definitely get into that. But also, he does amazing commercial work. We're going to have to talk about his skill set as a DP and how he brings his mastery of lighting to his craft. So I'm really excited to bring up my good friend, Robert Machado. What is up, bro?
What's up? How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. I know it was kind of last minute when I hit you up. I watched your video on the Burano, and I have to say, as far as like reviews on cameras go, it's definitely in my top 5 reviews I've ever seen on YouTube.
Wow, those are fighting words.
Hey, look, I was handling
maybe not fighting words, but those are strong words. Yeah.
No, dude, definitely top 5 as far as like what I saw, because it was one of those things when it comes to cameras. I could tell that you had a lot of experience shooting with the camera, which is like one of the things that's really hard. Like when you do YouTube professionally and you have a lot of channels that do a lot of camera reviews, there are some reviews where you can just tell that the person had like 3 days with the camera and they went out and shot their kids or their dog, or, you know, they did some charts in their studio and then they released a review talking about the camera. But I could tell that you brought something unique to yours, and that was like on-set experience and practical use case as a working DP. And then that all came together to make one amazing review.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely tried to take my time with it. And it's interesting with YouTube because it's like, like usually whenever new gear comes out, you want to try to be first just to kind of help out that algorithm. But I wanted to make sure that I actually spent a decent amount of time before I actually put out, you know, any concrete thoughts on it. And I even had people say to me the same thing. It's like, oh, we really appreciate you actually like spending actual production time with a camera before you just, you know, you just got your camera for the day and, you know, spent some time with it in the backyard, and here's my, you know, full in-depth review. So I definitely tried to take my time, and it's tough because like I see other people coming out with their videos on YouTube too, and I almost get FOMO because it's like, oh man, I want to put out my video too, but it's tough because you have to, you know, exercise a lot of discipline on YouTube sometimes.
Yeah, well, and I think it actually shows, because this is definitely one of your highest performing videos that I can remember on your channel. And like, I mean, like I said, I've got
bar none. Yeah,
it's a 1 out of 10 for sure. You got the little celebratory names and everything, but
yeah, it's crazy because sorry not to interrupt you, but it's that by far, like I think it's mainly because it's probably because it had a lot more criticisms, but by far it has been like the most popular video that I've ever like put. I think in the first day it had like 20,000 views, and that's never happened to me before, so it's pretty cool.
You're officially a YouTuber. You can give away your DP badge. You're now
I can transition.
You can do the transition. But no, what I think is really interesting about your video is how much use case you had with it. So I know, just because we had talked when you first got it, that you were going on to a set where you guys rented and used, and obviously having yours there too. What was it, like 5 to 7 Buranos? Is that right?
Yeah, I think we had a total of 7 on set with us, so it was a lot.
And I think that's really unique, one, to have a camera of that caliber on the project, but also to have a camera that was so new that, you know, didn't have a ton of on-set experience. I mean, the camera is less than 6 months old at this point, as far as it being like in everyone's hands. So what was it like to be on a set that used 7 Buranos, but also just, you had a bunch of people on set who at most had 6 months of experience actually using the particular camera y'all were working with? Yeah,
I mean, it was really interesting. Like, honestly, it's whenever it comes to new technology, it's almost a bit of a, you know, you're kind of rolling the dice a little bit, especially with kind of a brand new camera like that. And so, I mean, I wouldn't always necessarily consider it the smartest decision, but I mean, it also kind of speaks to a testament of how, you know, well Sony cameras perform. And even with all the shortcomings that the Burano has that, you know, we can obviously get into, it's still, it honestly was like a natural extension of what we were previously using. So we normally use FX9s for a lot of those, and this is basically like a juiced up FX9. So it was honestly pretty seamless, and there was definitely a noticeable image bump for sure in terms of image quality. So a lot of it was just figuring out all the random quirks, and it was nice having a good idea of some of the weird things going into it, rather than just kind of, you know, why can't I get this specific menu set? You know, it's like having a good idea, like having a list of all of the quick quirks beforehand was definitely like huge, just in terms of having 7 Buranos. So what I would do is I'd obviously spent a few weeks with the camera before that shoot, and then figure all that stuff out on my own, and then write up, you know, a spec sheet for my ACs, and okay, this is this specific down to each camera letter, like this is the specific setting we're using for this camera in this application. So it was honestly pretty seamless.
Well, it seems like it was pretty seamless because you were already kind of starting the process of reviewing the camera, even if at that point maybe you hadn't had the idea of making it like into a YouTube video yet, but like you kind of like started going through the process of really understanding and learning your camera. But you also mentioned that like you guys normally would use FX9s for a project like this, and so it was nice to have a few of the like image quality bumps that the Burano gave you over an FX9. But I know there's a lot of people who are probably looking at a camera of this quality. They see an FX9, they see this camera, and they're both expensive cameras. But for you, what made the difference between saying, okay, yes, it's worth to invest in a Burano, or for a project like this to say, hey, instead of running, 5 FX9s and, a handful of Buranos for our beauty shots, we want to go all Buranos. It's absolutely worth it to have 7 Buranos versus a mixture in order to really get exactly what you wanted out of the cameras.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it can go kind of both ways. So for a while we were on primarily FX9s, and I still love using the FX9 to this day, but the Burano is super nice because it's just enough camera for me to where it's like, I don't necessarily want to shoot on 7 Venices. We did have one Venice on that show, and so just kind of being in that Cine Alta family, it's able to match with the Venice 1 and the Venice 2 probably a little bit closer, but for me it has just enough image quality and is kind of also in a small enough form factor to where it's like it's nice not being able to bring out, you're talking about a Venice, you're instantly, your camera is literally this big. And then with that becomes all the support. You need, all new tripods, you need, all PL lenses. I mean, you can throw E-mount lenses on there, but you lose autofocus. So it's like a lot of the kind of FX series features kind of brought up to a Cine Alta level was kind of the selling point for me and for a lot of other people. And so we just kind of really got to test drive that kind of really firsthand on that show.
Yeah, and I think that's actually something that I didn't really think about, but makes sense. If you were already thinking about pushing towards going the route of maybe using Venices, the Burano really does become that smaller, easier to work with package, especially if you do need to run 7 of them. But there's still this value thing that I think happens a lot when people start buying cameras. And I was talking to Jarrell about this before we started the show, because there's a financial thing that happens, I think, that's really weird about high-end cinema cameras, that you pay a lot of money to solve 1 or 2 very small problems, but it's incredibly valuable to the cinematographer. The easiest way I can kind of associate it for me is it's almost like buying expensive cinema cameras is like buying a house versus renting an apartment. Mirrorless cameras to me are like apartments. The more you spend on most mirrorless cameras, the more amenities you're gonna get. You're gonna see these little micro boosts as you go from one apartment complex to another. But once you get to buying cinema cameras, a lot of it is like buying houses, which are even weirder because some houses, for example, I live in Houston. If you spend $2 to $3 million on a house here in Houston, you're getting a mansion. You're getting a massive, massive house. But you take that same budget and you go to Los Angeles with it, and you're getting a
little shack.
You're getting a shack. you're getting a nice shack and maybe a decent neighborhood, right? And so for me, it's when you start buying cinema cameras, it's almost like buying the location. It's the location has to be so valuable to you that it's worth spending that extra money. And a lot of times that's that little bump in resolution, or that's that little bump in dynamic range. And for a lot of filmmakers, that's not worth $10,000, $20,000. But for some, when that's the solution that you need to solve, because I can imagine for the project that you guys did where you had 7 Buranos there, obviously the cost of the cameras on set were probably pretty expensive, but I can imagine talent, lighting, location, all these other things cost so much money to put on that production that when it came to picking the camera that you were going to use to capture it, you wanted to be able to use the best camera possible, because at the end of the day, you got to get your money's worth when it comes to the shots. And if you have a camera that you're trying to cheap out on, but you spent all this money on the production, you're really kind of doing the production a disservice by using a cheaper camera.
Yeah, totally. And it's a lot of times I always approach it with a Venn diagram. It's what would be the absolute best camera that I could use for this job? And then on the second circle, it's what is the right camera that I should be using for this job? And so the two often have a lot of times independent cameras, but then, it's that cross section in between. And so it's what would be the best camera that we could just absolutely, Alexa 65, let's shoot on 7 Alexa 60. But honestly, it's
feel like there's another Venn diagram sometimes of like budget, like what can we afford as well.
Exactly. It's just somewhere else. But so it's like in that sense, yeah. And then you have to also compare a lot of those features too. But it's right. It's like a lot of the camera rentals were just a microscopic, fraction of the entire production budget. So it's like, you have to think about paying for talent, location, props, wardrobe, like literally so many different small things. And it's like, at the end of the day, the camera is really just, a tool. And most times it's just picking the right tool for the job. So it's like sometimes an FX3 is the right tool for the job, and it gives me the best image for, this specific job. I used one for the past 2 days and alongside the Burano. So it's like, I'm not always trying to bring out like an Alexa Mini LF on everything, even though, I would like to, but like a lot of times it's just not the right tool. So it's like, given the project circumstances, it's like, it really like that almost becomes a much more important decision, is like, what are you doing with the camera? What are you trying to do with the camera? It's like, how are you trying to capture this? And so it's just one of the many, many conversations and we have to navigate as a cinematographer.
Well, so that makes me wonder, how do you, with all these different things that happen, like you just mentioned, like there's all these different cameras that you can go back and forth from between deciding, like you own, as I said at the top of this episode, more cameras than anybody else I know. So I'm just going to go through the list of what I know you own, and then you just tell me where I'm off. So you own an Alexa LF. You own two FX9s, I believe. You have the Burano FX6s. Are there two of them? Mm-hmm. One or two? Two FX6s. And then you have a plethora of FX3s and FX6 or FX30s. Like you have all these other mirrorless cameras that I don't even add to your list because of all the other expensive cameras that you own. Primarily living in the world of Sony, how do you justify owning all these cameras when renting, one, is an option? And then two, how do you justify owning them when it feels like from project to project, you're constantly being requested to have different cameras?
I think you answered it just there. So for me, it's like I'm always being requested for very different cameras. And so that's why I own so many, is that they just kind of keep adding on, but it's like every project is different, right? So in some instances, I'll get requests now for, a lot of FX6s lately. And for the past few years, actually, it's become a really super popular camera. But a lot of times when I'm getting hit up from producers or whoever from Production Hub or just straight directly from my website, it's like they're looking, for owner ops and DPs, with cameras. And obviously it's not necessary to own one. Like it's super easy to rent them. But for me as an owner op, it's just becomes another source of income. And so it's nice being able to pick from a whole plethora of camera selections to, again, fit those requirements for that specific job. So like here in Vegas, we have a wide breadth of work coming in from doc, commercial, a lot of corporate stuff. And so, I'm not going to be shooting a corporate event on a Mini LF. So it's like, would I shoot it on a Burano? Maybe I could. FX9, totally. FX6, great. FX3, even better. So, and again, like going back to using specific tools with each camera, it's like, a lot of times people have come to love the gimbal look for, event coverage and stuff like that. So, you can throw an FX6 on like a smaller Ronin. But to me, it's like a lot of times it's just not worth the headache. And I'd rather just kind of run a little bit on a slimmer package for a lot of those jobs. So it's like, again, they're all kind of different tools and they all kind of fit different needs. And so that's why it's nice just having that selection. And again, for me, when I'm getting hit up from clients or producers, it's like they kind of that's almost an expectation now that you kind of own your own camera package. And not saying that you absolutely need to go out and, own your own. Like it's obviously more than feasible to rent and add that to the budget that you send off to them. And that's obviously a much more viable way of doing things too. But for me, it's kind of it's more financially viable to be an owner op.
Yeah, but I love your answer as far as like the justification of having the different cameras. But how are you like pulling the cord? Like, when are you pulling out your credit card to say, okay, now it's actually worth for me to buy this camera? Like, how do you get to that place? Like, obviously you've been doing this for a long time, so it's probably become second nature. But when you started going from owning one FX6 to saying, okay, now it's time for me to buy another one. I'm going to buy the FX9. Okay, I'm going to buy the LF. Like, how is it on your business side of things where you're like, okay, yes, this financially makes sense for me to own this camera because I'm going to see the ROI in X number of jobs? Or like, how are you currently setting that up?
Yeah, a lot of times it comes down to specific requests. So, it's easy to kind of pick out and determine specific trends that I'm getting from producers. So it's like, way back in 2015, 2016, I started with one FS7, and that was great, and that served me, very well up until about 2020 is when the FX9 came out. So I got one of those, and then eventually, I started to do actually most of the interviews that I do, there are at least two cameras, and so me personally, and the reason I have pairs of every camera almost is because of two camera interviews. So if it were up to me, I would always prefer shooting on the same camera for A/B camera, because no matter if you're on a FX9 or 6 or 3, whenever you start to intermingle them, it's never like a one-to-one match. Like, they get pretty close for sure, but like for me, like I love having just a pair of two matching cameras. So that's kind of where it comes down to for me. And then in terms of deciding on which cameras to buy next, again, it goes back to kind of evaluating those trends. And so, eventually I started getting asks for a lot of FX6s. And so I think that almost overtook the FX9 in terms of popularity, just because it's so small and it punches way above its weight class. So it's just an incredibly popular camera. So, a lot of it is kind of driven by those requests. And then, from there, it's like, okay, well then if I add a second one to my inventory, it's like, I'll have two cameras. And then there have been jobs where, I've been hired as just a camera op. The production's coming in town, some sort of doc production's coming in town. We're following, say, a show that's being created on the Strip. And it's like, okay, we need a small lighting package and, two cameras, lenses, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, cool. I have like literally everything you need. And so I'll work with them on that production, and then they'll end up coming back in town on a much bigger production where we have like 4 Venices, and again, hire me back on as a camera operator. So it's almost like having that rental availability and rental inventory is almost like opening the door to productions. Like even right now, I'm getting hit up for my Alexa because NAB is coming into town. So it's just a really nice kind of extra source of revenue. And not to say that the rentals are guaranteed too, because that's definitely not a thing. Like the moment you decide and go out and buy an Alexa 35, you're not just going to immediately just send it out. It's like you have to have those relationships kind of already established. And going back to why or how I kind of make those decisions in buying some of those higher end cameras, it's because I kind of have that work that facilitates that need for that level of camera. So it's like I'm on some of the shows that I'm doing, they are a little bit more bigger scale productions. So like that kind of warrants, that need. So like if I was just doing corporate work, it's like, well, maybe buying an Alexa Mini doesn't really make sense for me right now, but it's just a lot of about growth.
It sounds like you're really making sure that you can be your number one renter first before buying a camera that could possibly be rented out. And it's just coming off of like, what do you need for your clients? And then, so then you buy it so that way you can obviously handle your clients, but then you kind of double dip in a way where you allow your gear to get rented out. And because you have it available as a renter, sometimes you get hired as not only the owner to rent it out, but then you also kind of get a chance to double dip and be the operator too, which I think is a really unique way to kind of set it up. And I know obviously you have all this stuff listed on your website, but I think there's a big question that needs to then be answered. So you own, like we said, FX30s, FX3s, FX6s, FX9s, and now a Burano, and you have the Alexa LF. Clients aside, you push all the clients to the side, you can only pick one of those cameras to run with. I mean, you have more experience probably with all of the Sony lineup than probably most people who even work for Sony, because they get compartmentalized into their different groups. Of all of the Sony cameras, and we can throw the Alexa LF in there too, which one do you think is like, hey, you got to pick one off the table, you're running out of your studio, it's all on fire, you're grabbing one camera and you're running out the door, which one you taking? Everything's insured.
Well,
so money doesn't matter. Everything's insured. Well, it doesn't matter. You have a job tomorrow, or you might get a call about a job tomorrow. Which camera are you taking off the shelf?
Well, first question, what's the job?
No, you don't know. You have no idea what the job is.
I don't know. Then I'm not taking it. I'm hanging up. See ya. Bye. Peace. I need to know what I'm shooting.
Your warehouse is on fire. You got to grab a camera and run out the door.
Well, if my warehouse is on fire, then I'm just concerned monetarily. Then obviously I'll pick the LF just because it's such a kind of high ticket item. I don't want that insurance rolling back at me, but like, we need to drop this guy quick. So, but that's a good question. I mean, that's tough. I think if you're asking me bang for buck, I think the FX6 is probably the kind of catch-all, like can kind of fit most about everything. So, and it's such a nice size. I'm shooting right now on FX6, and it's like, I love using that camera, and it's got such a great image quality. As I mentioned before, it punches well above its weight class, and it's a phenomenal camera. So I might grab both of them just because they're so small and light. But yeah, that's if I were to only have one, yeah, that's a good question because the Burano's really expensive. But
y'all heard it here first. But finance still becomes a big deal, no matter how many cameras you have. He's still looking at the price point on which one he's grabbing. Which I'm not even mad at you. I'm the same way. If this whole place was on fire, I'm grabbing my Raptor and running out the door. Like, I get it. I totally get it. The one last little nugget that I would love to add on is just that, like, when it comes to like filmmaking and giving advice and stuff like that, like I know one big area, and it was like a little nugget that you mentioned, but like you're located in Vegas, which is an area where a lot of productions come into the city, and also a lot of productions are done there as well, as one of the bigger cities in the country. And so I'm sure that leans into a lot of like what you're able to do and what you're able to offer in your city. And the nugget that I would add in is that when people are online and they are trying to get insight on what they should do for their video business, there are a lot of factors in play that have nothing to do with your desires or your cameras. Sometimes it's based on your location, and sometimes it's just based on like the actual economics of your location as well. And so if you are someone who is thinking about trying to do something similar, think about your location a little bit. But also know that, like, something I know, Rob, that you get a chance to do is that you do get a chance to travel a lot for your jobs. And so by having that as something that you're open to doing, it also allows you to have more opportunities, because I know that sometimes I live vicariously through your Instagram because you're traveling to amazing places for some of your productions. And because you're willing to do that, you get a chance to go and do some of those bigger productions as well. And so for anyone who's watching this right now, who looks at Rob's content, likes what Rob is doing, know that location does play a role, but one way you can get around it is by making yourself available to travel.
I'll add on and say that location isn't necessarily the end all be all, but I think another thing is that I would also be wary of when you do look at other people's Instagram, and myself included, because I am the first to tell anyone that, like, I think my life looks a lot cooler on Instagram than it does in real life. And that's just my personal opinion. A lot of people always see me with, a bunch of cameras on these really cool jobs and big sets and stuff or whatever. But, a lot of times, like, I struggle through the same things that everyone else does at the same time. So I think work is really slow for a lot of people, and especially people out in LA. And whenever I talk to my crew out in LA, I kind of test I get a temperature of the waters, and they mostly all report back that it's just super slow and just not a lot of things going on. So, yeah, it's a weird kind of economic time for us as well. So I just keep that in mind whenever, if you do, check out my content or whoever else's content, just keep that as a quick little asterisk that, things aren't always sunshine and roses. So that's just my kind of pessimistic take.
No, I love that honesty, because I believe that too. Like, there are a lot of people who will look at, like, even my social, and then they'll be like, oh my gosh, you're on set every day, like, you must be doing great. And it's like, well, no, that was like, that's from like 2 weeks ago, or we just now, like, the NDA closed so we can actually post this content. So like, the timing's not always exactly one for one. And I just appreciate anyone who's willing to be honest and tell people, like, hey, like, like, my life is not exactly how it looks on social media. I'm just sharing the parts that I really want to share, which I think we all kind of know, but we forget sometimes when we're scrolling, especially, like, I know when things are slow for me and I start scrolling and I'm like, dang, Rob's always traveling, he's always on set. That's when I forget that I'm like, oh, wait a minute, everybody's life isn't exactly how they're putting it on a day-to-day basis on social.
Yeah, and a lot of times I try to be conservative when I can about posting on social media. I don't actively, schedule my posts for Instagram or even YouTube. Like, I try not to make it seem like I'm always busy and working. But I will say that things for me personally have kind of picked up towards April and May, which is nice. So I'm hoping that it continues that way for me and a lot of other people too. And especially now, since the first part of the year has been pretty slow, and especially coming off of last year too, I want to almost bring up the question to the title of this video, which I'm curious on your thoughts, which ultimately goes back to, and I want to ask you first, just someone kind of an outside perspective. Do you think the Sony Burano is worth it for $25,000?
I can say, for me personally, what I need out of a camera on a regular basis, I don't know if the Burano is the perfect camera for my use cases. And that's the thing for me. Like, when it comes to, like, is the camera worth the price? The truth is, it's like, no camera is worth the price if the value doesn't actually benefit you. And so, like, I feel like for your use cases, like, $25,000 for that camera, no brainer, because you're going to bring it out on multiple sets. Just like for me, I get requests. Like, literally, I did a shoot yesterday for my Raptor. It's $25,000 too. They hired me specifically as a owner operator for my Raptor. And that's what I get hired to do a lot when I'm going out as just a cam operator and doing my rental package. So for me, that price is worth it. Do I need autofocus? No. Technically, does it have it? Yeah, but it's not great. But, like, I don't need some of those things that some other people would look at and be like, for $25,000, your camera should have amazing autofocus. I don't need that for my jobs. So for me, I look at value not necessarily in a dollar amount, but more like, what does it do for me in my career? And so if spending $25,000 for Rob improves his career like tenfold, then yeah, it's a no-brainer decision. I think for me, the Burano is not worth $25,000 because I wouldn't use the benefits of it in the way that they're expected to be used. And so I wouldn't gain anything from that camera specifically. But if I spend $25,000 on a Red, I'm going to grow a lot more from that, and that's going to be more beneficial. So that's kind of a cop-out to answering your question, but at least that's my thought.
I mean, that's definitely an interesting perspective too, like determining and evaluating value, not monetarily, but kind of more so what it represents. And so, and I think it's almost to your point too, like I might kind of land in the same boat. For $25,000 monetarily, like, I am not sure that the Burano is quite worth that. Image quality is phenomenal. And, I think the highlight roll off and the skin tones and all of that stuff, like, they're basically Alexa level or Venice level. And the image quality is just incredible. I think the camera right now has a lot of shortcomings that just Sony's engineers just maybe didn't pay as much attention to as they probably should have. And so right now for me, the camera for me it's like any other Sony camera when it comes out. So for me, almost every Sony camera that I've bought has required some sort of workaround to some sort of shortcoming of the camera. So to me, like the Burano just like completely embodies that. So, you know, with the output formats, like I have to use a special C box to get, you know, to use HDMI into that and then distribute the signal to my monitors. And I have to, you know, have all the proper support rigging because the included viewfinder is like kind of a piece of and, you know, it's just kind of recognizing all of those things going into it. But I think it kind of really harkens back to my video and kind of the thesis. It's like I still really enjoy the camera, but that's not to say like I'm not disappointed. And I think that kind of embodies a lot of us who have bought this camera. I think a lot of us have, we're kind of split into two camps right now. On the Sony Burano user group, like half of them are just trying to get rid of the camera. They're just trying to immediately just get rid of it, just sell it, take it off my hands. $25,000. I'll include a few accessories, just trying to move it. And then the other half kind of have come to really appreciate the image quality and the things that the Burano does actually really well. So it's I think the Burano itself is a very kind of polarizing camera. And if you can utilize what it does well, I think it kind of adds a lot of value there. But for $25,000 monetarily, like you said, it's a little steep.
Yeah, I mean, and it sounds like from what at least I'm hearing you say, and even from some of the users, it's like the camera might be worth $25,000 because that's originally like you saw the camera, you saw the specs, you were like, yes, I want to spend my money. You put the credit card down or you paid cash, whatever it was. But the headaches that came with it make it less worth the price. And you're not willing, and like a lot of users are not willing to deal with those headaches. And that then brings the value down of the camera. And why I think
right, because then you have to end up spending more for those workarounds. Like I have to spend, you know, probably 10 or 15 extra $1,000 on accessories to get over those workarounds. And luckily I already had a lot of those accessories just from a lot of my previous cameras. So it's like I didn't have to go out and buy, you know, a whole lot of extra stuff to really make it work. So luckily I'm lucky in that I had a whole bunch of other stuff like laying around, but still it's tough because a lot of the limitations sound like they're hardware limitations and it's not really something you can easily fix with a firmware update. So it's
that's rough. I feel like that's how that happens with anybody who does this journey. Like, I mean, even like me and Jarrell have talked about this when it came to the Raptor. Like, is the Raptor worth $25,000? I think it is, but the question becomes, is it worth $40,000? Well, then you're like, well, wait, why is it $40,000? It's like, well, after you get cages and you get batteries, and then you also need to buy a server system for all the hard drives, and like after you start investing all the other elements into it, and if you're going back to all that being tied to the camera, then it may be like, oh, maybe it's not quite as worth it. So I think the journey of buying a camera, you really do have to kind of take all the things into consideration, like computers, hard drives, memory. I know you just got your RE cage for your Burano. Like there's all these other accessories that you put towards it. And depending on where you are in the journey, like some of those people, like you said, who are in the Burano user group, maybe the FX9 is actually going to solve more of those problems for a cheaper price than what they really needed. And so it's like, I can get rid of the Burano, go with an FX9, and feel confident that my main issues that I needed solved are actually going to be taken care of with this cheaper camera. Because that's what I normally find when people go from like expensive cameras to less expensive cameras. What they really find is that like whatever the problem is they want it solved, a cheaper camera actually solved it and at a more price effective margin for them. But then like if you are just looking for, like you said, superior image quality out of the Burano or out of your camera, it's worth it to just kind of deal with those headaches because the image quality for Rob specifically is worth that price difference.
Yeah, for me and a lot of the, you know, again, doc commercial kind of corporate stuff that I do. Yeah, exactly. It kind of fits all those boxes. And I think I think what's more upsetting about the $25,000 price tag is the fact that you can get a Venice or even Alexa Mini or a lot of other kind of older, like an Amira. You can get those for much cheaper than this entire thing. So it's like, a lot of people have been going that route too. Like a buddy of mine, he just got a Venice instead of going for the Burano. And again, you're basically buying more image quality for a much cheaper price. So I think that's where the sticking point kind of really begins to surface. And it's tough because, for me, like, of course I would love to use a Venice, but like I mentioned earlier, it's like, I'm not going to always default to always using a Venice or always using a mini LF on every single job, because it's just simply not the right tool. I'm not going to, a Venice for a standard corporate interview, just like, you can do it. And like, I've been on jobs where they have done that before. And like, just because it always goes back to just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right. Well, I love that. And I love your philosophy around gear, especially as someone who buys more gear than anybody else. But really quick, before we let you head out of here, where can people keep up with you? Where can they find your content? When are you going to post on a consistent basis? Please, more on YouTube. Tell the people, where can they keep up with you?
You can find me on YouTube. It's just my name, Robert Machado, and Instagram at Rob Machado. So again, like I said, I don't post super consistent because it's been pretty, I will say though, April is pretty stacked. I think I have probably 3 different videos coming out in April. So, I guess that's something to look forward to. But again, I think I mentioned it on Carlo's podcast a few months back, but YouTube kind of is always, I've always prioritized YouTube on taking the back seat as opposed to my regular work, because my regular work is where I draw from a lot of these experiences and kind of firsthand knowledge from. So like for me, being on set as a quote unquote real DP kind of gives me a little bit of leverage in terms of value that I'm providing over YouTube and stuff like that. And I'd like to think that people appreciate that.
I can say personally, I do. I appreciate it. So if you guys are interested in checking out some of his content, we'll have that linked up in the description. I absolutely recommend it if you are looking to improve your skills as a DP. And it's not just about, I know we talked a lot about his camera ownership, but a lot of his content and even some of my favorite, actually probably most of my favorite of his content on his channel actually is diving into like lighting and how he actually uses a light meter and going over contrast ratios and things like that. Things that no matter what equipment you currently have, having that knowledge is just going to make you better with the current equipment that you have. So I do strongly recommend that you check out his content. But dude, thank you again so much for checking out or coming onto the show. And I know you've been in the comment section, so thank you for also watching previous episodes. But I appreciate you giving a lot of knowledge to people today, because I'm sure people are going to be better off, especially after consuming more of your content when it's done. Yeah, thanks again for having me. These are always super fun. And again, I always try to tune in when I can, because I was just even watching your episode, I think from last week, just based off of client experiences, and it's like a lot of that stuff is totally relatable, because we have to be, at the end of the day, as filmmakers, you also have to be like your own entrepreneur. And it's just stuff, I went to film school and, I didn't learn a lick of any of that stuff. So it's like, we have to kind of figure out on our own, but being able to like come to the stream every week and kind of, being able to, I don't want to say take the shortcut, but like being able to pick off of, your knowledge and Jarrell's knowledge and whatever guest you have on is super, super valuable. So I definitely appreciate these streams as well. Oh, soundbite. Jarrell said soundbite. We're going to take that. All right, dude. Well, I appreciate you. We will see you in 2 weeks at NAB. And I'll see you then.
I'll see you at NAB. Yeah, let me know. I'll see you there.
Later, brother.